Sometimes the ones who aren't on the list are the ones who matter most. She didn't speak much, never asked for attention. But that morning without her, everything stood still. In a world of noise, her quiet presence carried weight. Picture her alone at dawn, gently oiling a rusted hinge the way her father once taught her, not because someone told her to, but because someone might need it working. This is the story of a woman whose strength wasn't loud but necessary. Stay with us, and if you believe quiet kindness still matters, you're in the right place. That morning, the mission room was all motion checklists, briefings, boots moving across metal floors. But in a corner, there was one chair, left empty. No one said it was hers. It didn't have her name, and yet no one dared sit in it. She wasn't on the roster, not officially. Some said she had been reassigned. Others whispered about a mistake in command. But if you watched closely, you'd see glances exchanged, a quiet kind of waiting, because those who'd flown with her before those who came back because of her knew. Sometimes it's not about protocol, it's about presence. And even when her name wasn't called, people noticed the silence where she should have stood. Somewhere on that base, someone was still hoping she'd walk in like she always did, quietly and just in time. But Claire Whitmore wasn't where anyone expected her to be that morning. While others were tightening straps and running pre-flight checks, Claire Whitmore was in the back compound alone and unnoticed. She was fixing a comms headset, not for herself, just something she'd found left slightly off frequency. There was no urgency in her hands, only precision, the kind of care that doesn't come from orders but from experience. Her fingers moved with a rhythm that suggested she'd done this before, too many times. A cloth, a dab of oil, a single twist of a wire too fine for most to notice. It was simple, almost invisible, and yet in missions past, that one click had made the difference between silence and a voice asking for help. She never said it, but Claire didn't fix gear. She kept hope functional, and just as she tested the final signal, the noise of the base shifted like something vital had just gone missing. Claire had just adjusted the last frequency when it happened. The sound of twin rotors filled the base, a familiar roar, always steady, always sure. And then, silence. Not the kind that follows completion, but the kind that unsettles like a breath caught mid-air. Something had stopped, and whatever it wasn't mechanical. She stood still for a second, hand resting gently on the side of the comms unit, like listening not just with ears, but with memory. Around her, even the wind, through the open hangar doors, felt paused. The kind of pause you only notice when you've seen too much go wrong before it ever made a sound. Claire didn't speak, but in that moment she felt it. Something had just shifted, and it was coming for her. Back in the hangar, someone was already shouting, "Stop that ramp! Stop that ramp!" The voice cut across the flight deck, urgent, sharp. Colonel Mathis, usually composed, was halfway to the transport when he shouted. At first, people paused out of confusion. Then, out of something else, instinct. It wasn't about protocol anymore. The mission, already cleared, was about to launch without the one person no one had dared put on paper. Someone tried to check the manifest again as if paperwork could solve presence. But the field commander face, pale, muttered under his breath, "She should have been here." No one needed to ask who she was. In places like these, there are names. And then there are silences that hold more weight than names ever could. And in that moment, the silence screamed. Claire Whitmore wasn't where she needed to be. And that was when General Monroe stepped onto the flight deck without a headset, without a clipboard, only one question in his voice. General Monroe didn't usually appear on the deck unless something had already gone wrong. But that morning, he walked past the flight commander, past the stunned technician, straight to the base of the ramp. No headset, no paperwork, just presence. He didn't shout. He simply asked, "Where is she?" 3 words. And yet they dropped into the air like a stone into still water. It wasn't a tactical question. It was a reckoning. Master Sergeant Hale looked down at the manifest, then back up. His voice cracked when he answered, "Sir." "Claire Whitmore isn't on the list." The general didn't blink. "I didn't ask for a list," he said softly. "I asked for her." And in that moment, every person on that deck realized they weren't just missing a name. They were missing the mission's only chance. Nobody questioned General Monroe after that, not because of his rank, but because, deep down, they understood. Claire Whitmore wasn't just a name on a form. She was the reason Flight Echo returned 2 years ago, when the weather had closed in and the rest had turned back. She was the voice on a secondary channel that found the lost recon team north of the ridge when official intel said they were already gone. She was the one who showed up when no one else could, and somehow still slipped back into the quiet before anyone thought to thank her. The general knew that, and now so did the rest. Her absence wasn't just a clerical error, it was a breach of trust, and the silence she left behind felt too heavy for any checklist to fix. Someone finally spoke what everyone else was afraid to say: "We need her. Now." For a moment, no one moved. The engines quieted. Boots froze mid-step. It was as if the base itself held its breath. And then, one voice. A younger officer, Lieutenant Ross, spoke into the space no one dared fill. Not loud, just enough to be heard. "Sir, respectfully, we need her. Now." That changed everything. Because sometimes it only takes one person to say what everyone else feels. And suddenly comms officers were checking frequencies. Runners were dispatched across the compound. The flight commander opened a secured channel, not to issue an order, but to ask a question that sounded more like hope. "Has anyone seen Claire Whitmore?" Because this mission wouldn't fail from lack of planning. It would fail from the absence of the only one who'd ever brought them home, when planning fell apart. At the far edge of the compound, someone stood up, slowly, as if she already knew they'd come. At the edge of the base, past the barracks behind the comms tent, a woman stood. Not startled, not hurried. Claire Whitmore looked up from the task in her hands, a coil of wire still warm from her touch. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't need to. There's a kind of knowing that only comes from having seen things break and still choosing to show up with steady hands. The runner who found her stammered the message, "General Monroe, he asked for you, personally." Claire didn't flinch. She didn't nod. She simply set the coil down, adjusted the sleeve of her jacket, and began walking toward the hangar. Not like someone being summoned, but like someone who'd been waiting. For the moment the world would remember what it needed most was already here. And by the time she reached the deck, they'd already cleared a path for her without a single word. When Claire reached the hangar, no one announced her arrival. But she didn't need an introduction. People simply moved. Not out of fear, not from command, but from something older, more instinctive, the way a room shifts when the center walks in. The crew chief stepped back. The flight techs lowered their eyes. There was no ceremony, no applause, just an unspoken knowing, she's here. "We're okay." General Monroe didn't salute. He didn't need to. He handed her a plain black envelope, weathered sealed. No explanation, no speech. Claire took it as if she'd already held it before, and in that quiet exchange, something that had unraveled began to rethread itself again. Inside the envelope was a single mission order. No backup, no name, just 3 words. "Take command, Air 2. Claire didn't open this envelope right away. She held it in both hands, flat firm, as if measuring its weight. It wasn't heavy, but it carried something heavier than paper. When she finally peeled back the seal, she didn't flinch. She simply read and nodded. No rank, no title, no chain of command. Just 3 words, handwritten in ink, already beginning to fade. "Take command, Air 2. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even an order in the usual sense. It was recognition, quiet and complete. The kind you only receive when someone has watched you succeed. In places no one else was willing to go. She looked up at Monroe. He didn't smile. He just said, "It's your mission now." And with that, Claire walked toward the one seat no one had dared sit in until now. Claire walked across the tarmac like someone who knew the weight of silence. She didn't rush. She never did. Around her, the crew moved instinctively, stepping back not out of formality, but out of quiet respect. Inside the aircraft, one seat near the front sat unclaimed. No badge, no placard, just empty. And for days, it had stayed that way, as if waiting for someone who hadn't been assigned but was still expected. Claire didn't hesitate. She placed the envelope on the console beside her, sat down, adjusted her strap. No one spoke. No one had to. Because when she took that seat, it no longer needed a name. And the mission no longer felt uncertain. But not everyone was ready to let her lead, at least not out loud. As Claire secured her harness, a voice from behind broke the hush. "With respect, sir, we already have a commander for Air 2. It came from Lieutenant Morrison Young by the book, sharp-edged with a good heart. His words weren't laced with anger, just uncertainty, And that's what made them human. General Monroe didn't turn. He simply raised one hand, palm open steady. "Lieutenant, there are missions you prepare for, and then there are missions you give to the one who's come back from worse." Morrison lowered his gaze, not in defeat, but in understanding, because sometimes a lesson doesn't come from explanation. It comes from witnessing someone take a seat no one else could earn. And Claire never looked back. What she looked at instead was the map, and what she saw no one else had even noticed. While the team resumed pre-flight procedures, Claire leaned forward toward the mission table. The digital overlay was full satellite passes, drone attempts, wind maps, all current, all clean. But Claire reached for something else. A folder tucked under the main stack, thermal imaging from 3 weeks ago. Outdated, ignored, marked non-relevant. She laid it open with quiet care, and there in the shadows most had dismissed as static was a pocket of retained heat, a shape too consistent, too still. She tapped the spot with one finger. "They're not gone," she said. "They're waiting. Right here. Not a guess, not a gamble. Just a truth she could feel, because some people read maps, and some read what maps don't say. And when she traced the path to reach them, the route didn't exist on any flight protocol. Claire studied the terrain overlay like someone reading between the lines of an old letter. She didn't rush. She never did. Then, with the back of her pen, she traced a route low through the canyons between peaks 17 and 21. Not on any official protocol, not even in the drone path records, but it followed the terrain like a thread pulled tight between fragile edges. We dropped beneath radar. "Here," she said, barely louder than a breath. "No chatter, no light, no room for mistakes." One of the pilots frowned. "That's blackout airspace, no visual exits." Claire looked at him, not dismissively, not to argue, just with the quiet confidence of someone who'd flown through worse and come back, because she trusted what others couldn't see. The team looked at the flight path and realized it wasn't just risky. It was impossible, unless she was the one leading. The map lay open on the console line, still glowing faint blue. Claire's hand rested gently beside it, still, but not uncertain. Around her, no one moved at first, not because they disagreed, but because they were recalibrating, relearning what it meant to follow someone who didn't command attention but earned quiet trust. One by one, heads began to nod almost imperceptibly. A pilot rechecked his controls. The navigator adjusted altitude input. Someone whispered, "She sees it," and that was enough. There was no applause, no announcement. But Claire had taken the lead, not with rank, not with orders, just by being exactly who she always was, when it mattered most. And when the engine started this time, no one asked for permission. They were already waiting for her signal. The cockpit lights glowed to life, soft amber over calm hands. One by one, systems powered on. No orders spoken, no checklist read aloud, just a shared rhythm, the kind that happens when people trust more than they question. Claire reached up, flipped a single switch. The engine responded, not loud, not rushed, just ready. Behind her, the flight crew settled into motion. Not because someone told them to, but because something inside them whispered, "Now." Morrison, the young lieutenant, glanced over. His fingers hovered near the comms, then paused. "Ma'am," he said softly. "You call it?" Claire gave a slight nod, and with that, Air 2 rolled forward like it always knew who it had been waiting for. What lay ahead was silence. No signal, no response, just the last coordinates, and a stretch of sky no one else dared enter. The sky stretched ahead like a question that had never been answered. No radar ping, no signal return, just coordinates and a silence too steady to trust. Claire adjusted the altitude dial not to correct but to feel the air better. She flew without speaking. Behind her, the crew instinctively quieted as if words might wake something best left sleeping. The last time a unit entered this sector, they didn't come back, not because they weren't trained, but because what they met didn't follow protocol. Claire didn't need that reminder. She'd flown here once years ago, and she remembered the echo of a call for help that never made it through the static. And then, right where the comms always failed before, Claire heard a single crackle in her headset. The headset had been silent for over 17 minutes. Not a buzz, not a flicker, just the kind of stillness that made you question if anyone was still out there. Then, a faint crackle. No words, no voice, just static, pulsing like a memory refusing to fade. Claire didn't speak. She just reached for the dial-adjusted frequency with the gentleness of someone who'd done this before, not once but too many times. Another pulse, this time clearer, 2 syllables, barely audible. Echo. Morrison looked up. Did you? She raised a finger, quiet, because when a voice returns after silence, you don't interrupt it. You listen, even if it's just to be sure you're not the only one still trying. Claire leaned in, closer, heart steady. If that signal was real, she only had one shot to bring them home. Claire leaned closer to the console headset, slightly askew. Not to block the noise, but to hear exactly what wasn't being said. The signal crackled again. This time a pause. Then, ridge, west, 3, hold, incomplete, fragmented, but not random. She pulled up the terrain overlay fingers, sliding with precision. Zoomed west. Paused. There she whispered. Not loud enough for drama, just clear enough for the team to feel it too. A shallow ridge known for signal deflection. But Claire had seen that kind of echo before, where voices bent around stone and came back half-broken. That's their hold, she said quietly. 3 clicks from the drop. If we miss it... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The window was narrow, and now they had minutes, not hours, to reach it. Claire looked at the crew. No fear, just focus. The ridge lay 3 clicks ahead and the window less than 6 minutes. Not enough to adjust, just enough to trust. Claire turned slightly, made eye contact with each crew member, no speeches, just presence. Morrison nodded first, then Walsh, then the crew chief. No one asked, "Are you sure?" Because some questions don't need asking, when the person answering has already proven herself quietly over years. The nose of the aircraft tilted slightly down. Rotors held steady. They slipped below radar. The air was thin, the margin thinner. But Claire's hand stayed firm on the throttle, not to push harder but to hold steady when everything around wanted to shake. Below the next ridge lay the canyon where 3 teams had disappeared. No comms, no exit path. Until now. The canyon opened before them, not wide but deep, the kind of place that swallowed echoes and never gave them back. Claire eased the controls. No one spoke. Even the rotors sounded quieter, as if the aircraft itself understood this wasn't just another flyover. This was where others had entered, and never returned. But Claire saw something most, didn't the way light touched the stone face at a certain angle or the subtle shadow line that hinted at a hollow. She didn't need coordinates. She remembered. From a mission no one had written down. A rescue that never made it into the files. Below that bend, she said softly, they're holding just beneath the crest. And this time no one doubted her. But just as they prepared to descend, another voice came through the static. And it wasn't one of theirs. They were seconds from breaking formation, just about to dip into the blind canyon. When it came. A voice. Not loud, not sharp, but wrong. Echo. Do not proceed. Airspace compromised. Morrison frowned. That's not their channel. Claire didn't move. She listened. The voice came again, not panicked, not friendly. Repeat. Echo 1. Fall back. Ridge not secure, no ID, no origin. Just precision. Too clean. Too early. Claire turned slightly, just enough for her crew to see her eyes. That's not one of ours, she said. And they're not warning us. They're trying to make us turn around. Below movement, just a flicker near the rocks. Claire narrowed her eyes. They weren't alone. Claire narrowed her gaze, eyes tracing the jagged line of stone. Then she saw it. A flicker. Not large. Just a shift, like someone moved behind a boulder, then froze. Eyes left Ridge 6, she whispered. Walsh adjusted the scope. Pause. Then, that's not one of ours. Claire didn't flinch. She had seen this before. Not combat, not open confrontation, but surveillance. The kind that waited for you to make the first mistake. She turned to Morrison. We're not the only ones listening to that signal, and just beneath her voice the weight of a truth none of them said aloud. Maybe the team below isn't just lost. Maybe they're being kept there. Claire made her decision. No retreat. But this would no longer be a standard extraction. This was now a silent negotiation with unseen eyes. Claire didn't call for backup. She didn't radio for confirmation. She just sat back in her seat and listened. The static was still there. So was the watcher on the ridge. We're not retreating, she said softly, but we're not declaring arrival either. Morrison turned to her. Ma'am. What exactly are we doing? Claire exhaled slowly. We're asking for permission, not from command, from whoever's already made this place their own. She reached for her console-adjusted signal strength not to boost but to narrow. A soft tone pulsed through the canyon, rhythmic, familiar, not military, personal, a pattern only one person would recognize, a code she'd used before once. For someone who'd once said, if I'm ever stuck somewhere I'm not supposed to be, don't call, don't shout, just tap the memory. Moments passed. Then, from deep inside the ridge, 3 short tones. A reply. Claire closed her eyes. They heard her. 3 short tones. No words. No confirmation code. Just 3 soft, spaced pulses. But Claire smiled. They heard me, she said. Walsh looked up, puzzled. That was... Them. Claire didn't answer. She didn't have to. In some moments, words break the spell, and this was a moment that needed keeping whole. She keyed a brief reply, just 2 notes. Like a heartbeat. Like a pause between thoughts. The tone wasn't meant for enemy ears. It was meant for someone tired, pinned down, who'd stopped believing help was still coming. Claire's hand rested on the console. Her voice low. We're close. Don't move. Wait for the quiet shadow. The crew didn't fully understand, but they followed her calm, because even the sky seemed to lean in. Coordinates aligned. Altitude locked. They were going in no lights, no chatter. Just trust and the map only Claire could see. The final descent wasn't marked by commands. No countdown, no clearance, just a gentle tilt downward and the sound of breath being held. Lights off, Claire said quietly. Her fingers moved across the panel with the softness of someone folding a note they never meant to send but must now deliver. No one questioned the darkness. They flew by instinct, skimming the curve of the canyon like they belonged there. Claire's eyes never left the terrain, but her mind, it was elsewhere. Back to a ridge like this where she once waited alone, unsure if anyone would come. That memory didn't haunt her. It guided her, and now it was her turn to arrive for someone who'd stopped hoping. Then, at the edge of the rock shelf movement, a figure low to the ground signaling with just one hand. They'd found them, but someone else had found them too. Near the edge of the rock shelf movement, a crouched figure, one arm raised, not waving. Just a flat palm held steady like a whisper that says, we're here, but not safe. Claire slowed. Every second felt stretched like the air itself was waiting for permission. Then Walsh whispered, Ma'am. Look 10 meters behind. Claire leaned forward. There a second shadow. Still. Too still. No gear, no visible weapon. But posture, wrong. Too upright to be a stranded soldier. Too calm to be afraid. Claire didn't panic. She simply said, they're not alone down there, and neither are we. She toggled the comms once, a silent signal to prepare for extraction. But, in her chest, a quiet knowing this mission won't end in the air. It will end with a choice. Claire didn't issue the command. Not yet. The team waited eyes on her. The shadow near the rock still didn't move, and the crouched figure had stopped signaling. Claire whispered into the headset, I need eyes. Heart rate thermal. Pulse check. Walsh keyed the scan. One figure high, adrenaline, elevated cortisol. The other, calm. Too calm. That's not one of ours, Morrison said. Claire already knew, but knowing doesn't solve the moment. She glanced down at the coded signal pad. One press, they descend. But that would expose the real survivor. One press, they wait. But wait too long, and the one who called might lose hope. Claire closed her eyes and remembered a voice once said, sometimes the rescue isn't the act. It's the decision to show someone they're worth risking for. She pressed twice. Not go, not stay, just hold. A third choice. Her own. And somewhere in the stillness one figure raised their head. Not to run, not to plead, but to meet her eyes, as if to say, you remembered. The figure stepped forward slowly, deliberately. No rush, no fear, just trust. Claire met the eyes under the helmet, dust-covered, blood-dried, but clear. There was no salute, only a soft nod, and Claire, without smiling, nodded back. You waited, her gaze said. You came, the eyes replied. No words passed, but a full conversation had been exchanged. Behind them, the crew remained still. No questions, just silence, like honoring a moment that didn't need explanation. Back on the ramp, Claire walked last, her shadow long against the floodlights. In her hand, a scrap of cloth marked with a name. Quietly, she tucked it into her flight jacket, for no one to see. But it would fly with her. Every mission from here on that name would never be forgotten again. Some stories don't end with a headline. They end in a glance, a breath, and the knowing that someone showed up when it mattered most. If her quiet strength moved you, you're not alone. At Kind Woman Stories, we gather voices like hers, gentle, enduring, and true. Subscribe and stay for the stories that speak not loudly, but deeply.